UK and how I think it has gone astray. Don't get me wrong, it ain't all bad. I love the crazy fads, like England always buggering up. But you know we're gonna win the World Cup. I'm gonna start the old nation with myself for preservation. I'm gonna start the old nation with myself for preservation.
Keep the red flag flying here.
And welcome to Political Unmuted, the second show of the new series. And it's dark outside. It's suddenly dark outside. I've spent the last hour terrified that I'd missed the start. I kept sort of looking at it thinking, oh, they must have started. I've missed the start. And you say, and lovely to see you, listeners, and people watching on the podcast later, or listening, I suppose, on the podcast later. You're so very, very welcome. Today, it's me asking the questions, John D. Clare, and I have the Dream Team. Say hello, Dream Team. Paul Daly.
Hello there.
Laura Daly.
Hello.
Stuart Sutherland.
Hello.
Quiet and noble. Sam Townsend.
Hello.
That's the ex-secretary. So we're ready to go. We have got another guest. We hope we'll be able to bring onto the show at the beginning of the second session after 10 p.m. But for the moment, it's just us answering the questions that you chose on the poll that you wanted to talk about. My golly, there's some things that to talk about today. But we'll probably start. Let's start with our moment of the week. And Paul wants to go first.
I'm not. I'm just gonna do this.
As always, our seamless professional production here, sort of with everything going smoothly. Yes, it is moment of the week, and I'll start with Paul anyway, just to serve him right for me.
Okay, so I guess my moment of the week is the national insurance hike. I guess we're probably going to talk about this kind of thing next week if the poll is interested in doing that. But it wouldn't be right not to mention the fact that the Tories are breaking an election pledge, and they're breaking it in like a tax rise on national insurance is the most regressive way to do it. It hits the people at the lower end and in the middle hard, and it lets the top people off. And we've just seen this situation where we've got national insurance is going up, council tax is going up, cost of living's going up. I'm a teacher. I'm getting a pay freeze because I'm a key worker, and I'm so important because I'm a key worker, but I'm not important enough to get a pay rise. I'm getting a real terms pay cut with all those extra costs as well. And it's not just me, you know, I'll be fine, I'm sure. But like, you know, generally the idea of key workers, we were supposed to come together and support them. Meanwhile, billionaires have increased their wealth by a third in the space of the pandemic, and you just think they are laughing their heads off at us. They think we are utterly stupid. They think we've managed to trick those stupid, thick people into voting for us, and now we're going to crap on them from a massive height, because you know what? We do this for our donors. We don't do it for you. There is no such thing as levelling up. There is only such thing as levelling up their funds. And just to add in a final little thing, I'm currently listening on an audiobook to the Panama Papers, and it's what a disgraceful thing when they were hiding all the money. The only the billionaire money, that's just the money we know about. That's just the money they're willing to declare. They'll be hiding things. There'll be all sorts of things going on. We don't know the half of it. They are laughing at ordinary people, and this is the world in which we live. And Keir Starmer today said, no longer can the Conservatives be considered to be the party of low tax. And you're like, right, way to miss an open goal again. Well done, matey.
Thank you, Paul. If you're a new listener, Paul never does moment of the week. He always has 2 or 3 which he crams into the same talk. Thank you very much. Sam, what's your moment of the week? Is it as long?
Well, I, as a 30-something-year-old woman, newly elected county councillor, watched my first Twitch stream esport the other day, and I loved it because it was Stardew Valley. Anybody who doesn't know anything about Stardew Valley, it's a farming simulator game, and it's really, really good, and I love it, right? And the guy who made the game, his name is Concerned Ape. It's not his real name, he's called something else, but that's his gamer name, his developer name. He made the game all by himself. He developed it all by himself. He's a genius. And he donated £40,000 of his own money as prize money for these 16 people who were trying to play his game really, really well within a 4-hour period. So I just think, so some people listening to this who will be like, I have no idea what she just said, that was all gobbledygook to me, and they understand how much £40,000 is, and that's a lot of money to give to people on the internet for playing a game. But this is the world we're living in, and it just goes to show you can't really assume anything about what's going to happen in the future, because it totally blew my mind what was going on in front of me, and a lot of people will be totally oblivious to this phenomenon that's going on. But these people are old enough to vote.
Internet gaming, Sam, is a big thing. I'm aware of that, and they have huge international competitions and the big. But I've never heard of Twitch, and I'm absolutely at sea about this farm game. I once wrote a farm game. I really did. I think it was published, but so I'm sure it was nothing like yours. So first of all, Twitch is a platform.
Yeah, it's like YouTube for gamers. We go out on Twitch. There may be people watching us on Twitch right now, and it's very immersive, the way that it shows everything, the way that it shows. It's got loads of really exciting emojis that really drag you in, and different ways of displaying information. But yeah, it is and you get adverts as well, just like you do on YouTube. And that's interesting as well, how the adverts are different for that demographic. There was a really, really good skincare ad that was aimed at sort of 20-year-old men, which was really interesting. But yeah, it's interesting how different people are going to different places on the internet, receiving different messages, and choosing to spend their time and money in different ways. One of the players had played the game. If it was his full-time job for 8 hours, he would have played the game for 3 years.
So now, do you download Twitch as an app then, or do you sign on? How do you go on Twitch?
Yeah, just like on YouTube, you've got an app for your tablet or your phone, and the web page for your desktop computer. Right. It's just that.
I'm sorry to cut you off, Sam, but we've got to get down to the discussion. And the last thing, tell us about the farm game. What does it? How on earth is it a competitive game? I mean,
it's a beautiful piece of brain space where you have a farm, you've got to grow plants, and you've got to make friends with the people in the town. And if you make friends, if you talk to somebody in the town enough and you give them all of their favorite things, then they might marry you and you can have babies.
All right. Now there was what was the name of that family? Is it similar to that family game where they weren't called the Smurfs? There's some
Sims.
The Sims, yes, where you could set fire to the house and kill people. I mean,
yeah, I guess the guy. It's more like no, it's gone. But it's a simulator. It's another one of these life simulator type games where.
Okay, thank you. And again, sorry to interrupt you, but I'm going to move on. But,
it's fine.
Samantha Townsend in a different world to me, and sort of moving off into the distance, leaving me behind. Stuart, hopefully you got a more comprehensible moment of the week for an old man.
Yeah, I love how excited and interested you were in, what is essentially, a children's game. I don't want to say children's game, a game for anybody. Anyway, yeah, my moment of the week is in my town, we're having an election that nobody wants. So there's a town council by-election, and the general feeling is that we shouldn't be having it. Cost too much money. We're only just out of an election where only one person didn't get onto the town council. There were other options, and we're just we've been having campaign meetings, and everybody's a bit like, I wish we weren't having to do this. For all we want somebody, on our end of the table at town council. Nobody really wants to have an election for it.
That's very interesting, because there was a similar thing at Great Aycliffe, and an attempt, not by the Labour Party, I might point out, to actually fiddle things and keep things quiet and under wraps, in the hope that we could just not appoint anybody to that position at all. Absolutely illegal. The only reason you have an election, Stuart, is if anybody stands. If nobody stands, well, then you just quietly co-opt. So there must be people standing, are there?
Well, clearly, I think the signatures, 10 signatures goes into like DCC for us, or electoral services. And we've had 4 candidates. One of them's a Labour member.
Good.
So there's interest in it from that small group of people, but the general feeling is nobody really wants an election in the village, or town, should I say, town.
So you'll be at next your moment in the week in a few weeks. Will tell us what the turnout was. We may be talking about the dying of democracy later on in the programme. Laura, moment of your week.
Well, I didn't have one before we started, so I've had to have a quick think. The thing is about this week is that I know for a fact I had a load, and I kept thinking, oh, I best write that down for moment of the week, except I didn't write any of them down. And then I had a car crash. So I'm probably going to go
moment of the week, the car crash.
Maybe. Or the kids went to school great.
Are you all right?
That's
our moment of the week. Are you okay after your car crash?
Yeah, I'm also on a lot of naproxen right now, so if I don't make any sense, that's why. But no, what I decided to
will we be able
was,
to tell the difference from normal? Is it
well, we'll see. So it's kind of like a blast from the past. It was a video that Paul shared by somebody called Alan Watts, and it was on a proper way of living, and it was all about taking your time through things and not rushing to get to an end point, and just sort of living in the here and now. And so that was like, right, okay, I need to do that. I feel like I need to try and calm down. It was a really lovely video, and I suggest everybody watches it and lives within their own space and time, and don't always think about tomorrow, think about now. So that was really lovely. I just got to try and live it now if I can.
Thank you. Live for the moment and don't worry about tomorrow. Thank you very much for that thought as we head out of moment of the week. And by the way, hiya Heather. Lovely to see you joining the programme. The Dream Team. You always say nice things about the Dream Team, Heather, and the Dream Team loves you too. Okay, I've not forgotten, Paul. I've not forgotten this time.
Now it's time for the big story.
What happens after the poll is that we see which questions have won the poll, and then I sort of put them upon the a little private group we've got on Facebook, and the Dream Team squabble between themselves as to who gets what. But this week it went just like that, and poor old Paul, who wasn't in the conversation, he got the last question that nobody wanted. So everybody got otherwise what they wanted. Sam, and you start off. And this was, I thought, an intriguing headline. Not one that you wouldn't expect to read, to tell you the truth, because it fits in with stereotypes. Sort of Labour councils house 8 times as many asylum seekers as Tory areas, analysis finds. I mean, is this just true to stereotype, Sam?
Like you say, it's really interesting as well when you think about the other stereotype that people in maybe Labour heartlines might be a bit racist, a little bit like, not, we don't want outsiders here, that kind of attitude. I just think, I mean, first of all, I will say that I've only had a very short career so far as a county councillor, but definitely the most proud I've been has been being able to give people information about how they can help with the Afghan asylum seekers, refugees that are coming into this country now. And it's just a crying shame that we're not helping more of these people. I think the story is that Darlington, I don't know how many families County Durham's getting yet, but Darlington's getting 4 families. I think the whole of North Yorkshire was only getting 8 families. So we can definitely help more people. But what the story in the, where is that? In the Guardian says is that there are 8 times as many refugees and asylum seekers, even before this Afghanistan mess, living in Labour-run parts of Britain than Conservative areas. And this is where the government could show that it really believes in levelling up, because we know that these Labour-run areas are more badly affected by the way that council tax is set up, that leafy Surrey gets a lot more money per council taxpayer than County Durham because it's based on property prices. And what they're doing is they are locating refugees and asylum seekers in places where it's cheaper to live, and that tends to be Labour-run areas. But the add-on to that is that these areas have less money and less resource to help people, and that has the effect of entrenching the inequality that we already feel. So if they were really serious about levelling up, they would have a system where refugees and asylum seekers are dispersed based on population size, but based on giving everybody a fair share of who's coming into country, not giving the poorer areas with the least resources more people to help. We're happy to help them, absolutely. Refugees are welcome in County Durham, but we do need the money to resource this kind of resettlement.
How well do you think Britain as a whole is doing in dealing with the? I read a thing in one of the newspapers that we only managed to get one of the 125 embassy guards that we promised we would bring back to Britain. We only managed to get one of those back to Britain. I mean, is this just part of a wider failure? Is sort of getting the arguments are getting merged into who deals with asylum seekers and refugees, rather than specifically about the Afghan situation. What's your take on the situation of actually helping Afghani refugees? How are we doing?
I think, unfortunately, there have been some real crimes against people being done by us and by the Americans, and that nobody will ever answer for that. The fact is, not only have we left people behind, but we left behind the databases with all of the biometric information so that everybody who worked with us could be identified by the Taliban. The level at which we've betrayed people is off the scale. And we can go further than that. It's not just people who worked for us. There are people who worked for companies who worked for us who were messed around. There were people waiting, begging anybody who looked vaguely European to look at their documents at Kabul airport minutes before they were maimed and killed by Taliban. So what we've done to those people is horrendous. What we've done to the women who lived and grew up in a society where they could be anything, and now they're going to be locked in their family home. What we've done to them, and the fact that there doesn't seem to be any plan to allow women to escape from Afghanistan is worrying and sad, but nobody will ever be accountable for this. It will just be, oh dear, well, there we go, we tried, and then we'll invade them again in 20 years' time.
Thanks, Stuart. We're bringing these people into the country at a time when we're cutting universal credit. We are not promising that they will be given leave to remain. God knows what they're going to do if we let them down on that. Do you think that we're treating the refugees appallingly badly? Sort of when they've really had enough to ruin their lives already?
I think it's evidence that we treat all, people in this country pretty badly if they don't have a lot of cash. The things that people, that they have a right to, like you would imagine, food, education, a place to live. These are things that everyone considers a right, but the government will take no responsibility in. And it applies to people, whether they're from County Durham or, Sussex or Afghanistan. And it's sad that people haven't come to the realization that we need to legislate better to support people properly to a moral and ethical level.
Laura, I have a question for you. There has been an increase in hate crimes in areas taking large numbers of Syrian refugees, particularly Afghan refugees. And yet at the same time, there's been this massive outpouring of support in terms of donations. Do you think that the appalling nature of the government's response mirrors an appalling response by the British people, or do you think that actually the British people are doing as much as they can, and it's the government alone that's failing? What sort of how would you rate the country's response to this crisis? You're on mute, Laura.
I did it. I can't believe it. I'm so sorry. I think it's really interesting that you asked me that question, actually, John, because I was talking to somebody about that very thing today, because people have such hatred for refugees and asylum seekers without ever having set eyes on one. Yet we can't give stuff away because all the donation banks are full, which is amazing. It goes to show that people who really do care, but unfortunately there is an aspect of society that doesn't want to know, doesn't want to help. And I think that is as a result of the government's response to anybody who's othered, basically anybody who's not white middle class. Asylum seekers have been treated appallingly, and the fact even here with asylum seekers from Syria and now Afghanistan coming in, they've been treated like political tools to use to win votes. So the last time around at the election, they were used as a reward system, basically, for swing seats. They would say to swing voters, well, I tell you what, if you vote for us, we won't put all of these refugees and asylum seekers in your town, we'll put them somewhere else. And 9 times out of 10, those places were poorer places, also because they've got private contracts with people who were building the houses for these people, and those private contracts are in to build cheap houses because they're not going to make any money out of them, and cheap houses obviously go into disproportionately poor areas. So it's just piling on, and people who are already struggling then see all these asylum seekers who have we've been told from day dot that they're the problem with our society and the reason we're struggling, then come and join our neighborhood, and people are just like, well, what's this? I don't want these people here. So absolutely, I think it is just a complete reflection of how the government have forced people to think and forced people to feel, and have just let everyone down, left, right, and centre. It is really heartwarming to see people willing to give and willing to help. I think that there's a lot of that. The people who are the haters do tend to shout louder. But even then, I think there's a distinction between those who are racist and those who are just struggling and have been sold a lie.
I mean, one of the constant things you hear, Laura, isn't it, that the I'm going to call them the indigenous population, and they are not just whites. The sort of the people who live there in the town are having to wait years for housing, can't get a house for love nor money, and there's a lot of objection that the refugees seem to come in and go to the top of the housing list. I mean, one is I mean, how much is this an urban myth, and how much is actually a real problem? And secondly, what can be done about it if it is the case?
Well, it's not an urban myth as such. It's funny. I actually had this conversation as well at the gym a few days ago before the accident. So there are houses being built specifically for that are now earmarked for refugees and asylum seekers. However, those houses are very, very, very cheap and are not really up to code or scratch and are just being thrown up. Of course, people around the area see those houses being built and go, well, hang on, I can't get a house. So there are two issues there. Well, the one that encompasses it all is just the lack of care for anyone who needs any help. And that includes asylum seekers. It also includes people who have got jobs but can't afford to get their own house because our system's such a mess and our pay rates are so bad and inflation is terrible and the government don't look after anybody except themselves. And, like I said earlier, the government do have a handy way of pointing the finger at the people they want you to blame and then expect people to be okay when they move in next door. It's all planned. It's all a system that's been designed this way. Because, that fear and hatred fuels votes. And I think we saw that with, the B word and all of that. It's much easier to get somebody on your side if you terrify them about something than it is to give them a bit of hope. And people are desperate. And I think they're too busy being desperate to see the cause of that, which is our government and our, many years of austerity, rather than trying to look at the hopefulness and the positive of, wow, isn't it lovely that we're actually trying to help people who need help, who are fleeing war-torn countries. It's like that whole argument isn't even talked about. It just gets lost in that whole conversation.
Thank you, Laura. Paul, this comes up very clearly in the recent hoo-ha that has been about Priti Patel being lobbied by Conservative MPs to pick up migrants who crossed the Channel and then just dump them back in France. Absolutely illegally and against our United Nations Code promises. Do you talk to us about the political game side of this? Talk to us about the politics going on in these issues.
There are a lot of like chicken and egg situations here. There's like what came first? Did the hatred of refugees come first, or was that driven by something else? Was that driven by like certain political figures in like whipping that up? Because one of the things that's very interesting, if you have a look at the things that stop things like racism and stop hatred in communities, it's actually contact. Actually speaking to those real people and realizing they're just humans exactly the same as anyone else, and not every person who comes into a country will be absolutely lovely, and not everyone will be absolutely horrible. They will have the whole spectrum of different types of human in there, and you'll really get on with some and you'll not with others, and they're just humans. That's what it comes down to. But they have like the idea of immigration. I think it topped the poll this week in things the Conservative Party were worried about, Conservative voters were worried about. It's immigration, and you look at that, like what I mentioned at the beginning is my moment of the week. That is so much more worrying than any form of immigration. And that really, do you know, like, there's people as well, they talk about things like the free market. They talk about the free market. Well, in a free market, people would be allowed to move over borders in order to work wherever they wanted. But what they mean is a free market for capital, so they can go where the cheap labour is. Because what they'll find is, like, if people can move, then wages kind of come together and everyone's uplifted. I can't really go into it in detail here. We'll have to go into it in another show. It's just very, very interesting how it's been politically manipulated to make it seem like these people who are coming over, who they've never seen before, are somehow the nasty ones, where the people who are making their lives bad are the government, are the people who are making these decisions that are like increasing the national insurance, or, you know, not giving people access to houses. And some of the comments are really good. Had our first comment on Discord as well, which is really nice because I've just set that up. Like, and it's the same people who say, this is from Leo 2021, who we know who it is, but I'll not break cover on that one unless she wants us to. It's the same people who say look after our own first, that walk past homeless people and are happy to see our kids go hungry, that are now using this as an excuse to say we can't help refugees. And I think we've seen that, haven't we? We've seen the All Lives Matter brigade, all lives matter, but then when it comes to an Afghanistani refugee, they're like, well, no, not them. And then what we meant is that black people should just shut up. That's what they meant by all lives matter, really, some of them. And then homeless people, we'll look after our own. But they're not interested in looking after our own. It's that selfish mentality, and it's been kicking around for a very long time. Some people have always been selfish, but there was an engendered, like, kind of selfish attitude that came across in the 80s with Reagan and Thatcher, and look after yourself. And I think that's where it comes from.
One last question for you, Paul, and it arises from a comment by Amelia Washburn, where she says, we do have a small proportion of people shouting against the refugees. However, the media give them a voice. Do you think that this is a problem of portrayal and media exposure, as much as it's a problem of real racism and problems like that?
Okay, so again, looking at the media, you had these people when David Cameron became Prime Minister. You had all these people who politically were conservatives appointed at the BBC. So, like, George Osborne's brother-in-law was given a really high. Was it his brother-in-law, someone he was best man for the wedding? Anyway, something like that. They were all very much connected with one another, and over time, they've become more and more conservative. And then when you saw, like, that Nigel Farage had his own seat, you know, he might as well have his name on the back of it on Question Time. These are niche views that become more prominent when they're given more airtime. And maybe they did that because it was entertaining. Or maybe, like, you know, because they got Nick Griffin on and he made a fool of himself, didn't he, for the BNP? Maybe they were trying to do that. Although I am told that there were a lot of people at the BBC very, very, very sympathetic with the anti-immigrant rhetoric, and they wanted to push that. So, you know, there are no politically neutral journalists. What's the point of becoming a political journalist if you're neutral? Just admit it. Just say, like, you're right wing, like Andrew Neil does. At least he admits it. Or you say, like us, you're left wing, or, you know, and that's the problem, isn't it? It's the pretense of neutrality. The BBC at the moment, with all the people who've been politically appointed, are nowhere near neutral, and they can't even pretend to be neutral. And yet they say, oh, well, we'll have balance by having one climate change denier and one climate change scientist who's actually done the research, and he represents 99% or she represents 99% of the people, and this person represents 1% who's funded by far-right think tanks.
Thank you, Paul. People commenting, fabulous comments. Some that Samantha's already sent, she's going to be picking up later. Solutions, people, if you've got an idea for a solution, ram it up there and we'll be able to look at it later. I'm going to bring that to an end now. Thank you very much indeed, and we move on.
I know the story.
And now we go on to what will laughably called our 3 quick questions. I remind the dream team, quick questions is the word. One of the things you wanted to talk about was our local MP, Paul Howell, backing an HS2 East line. Is he bonkers, Stuart?
Oh, yeah, most definitely. I mean, I've had a read of the article, and there's the usual, capacity. We need more of this, we need more of that. And at the end of the day, he's talking about what is, will be a wildly overpriced rail upgrade that's going to be ecologically damaging. But at the same time, we're going to have the same crappy old East Coast main line that people can't afford to use. We're still going to keep hold of all the, Victorian railway up the East Coast that should have had the money spent on it, that the HS2 money needs to really be spent on to do something with, to, give us the powerhouse of the North Railway. And then in the article, he goes on about, the economic benefits of a small station and how a sandwich shop would pop up and it just spirals. Well, Newton Aycliffe has a small station, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Has that spiraled into a metropolis as yet?
No.
Ferry Hill, they're talking about the Lameside line, which would provide a really useful freight divert and a connection to Teesside. But it's not going to turn Ferry Hill into a metropolis overnight without some real investment in proper community stuff. They don't have a proper bank. If a town doesn't have a bank, but you want a railway station, things are a bit mixed up. People want services they can use and afford, and HS2 will just be something else that they can't afford to use.
Thank you, Paul. Sam, I do know that Shildon have been going mad about the lack of connection between the railway station and the locomotion museum that's adjacent to it and the town centre, and the fact that the town centre isn't benefiting in any way from the sort of not just the railway station, but the adjacent attraction, which has a massive visitor numbers over the year. I mean, do you agree with Mr. Howell when he says that that it's going to create economic opportunities?
Well, exactly. What we need to look at is how people get to the train station, not necessarily where the train station is. We've got a train station in Shildon, and like you say, it's totally the wrong end of the town. And unfortunately, it's so difficult to just add a little bit extra track on. It would be great if we could somehow marry up the heritage railway side and the mainline railway side and just run some track to bring people closer to the town centre, but just so much work involved. And Shildon, of course, is the place where anybody could just chuck a train on the on the line in 1890. Somebody might do that. Just chuck a wagon on the line and just give people rides. That's the entrepreneurial side of early Shildon. So I understand that can't be done anymore. But yes, the future of rail travel also has to seriously look at how people get to a train station. We don't have any fancy e-bikes or e-scooters in Shildon. We don't even, have very good cycle infrastructure for normal push bikes. That would be a really good way to help square that circle, to get people to the train station, have trains that have appropriate storage for bikes. That would be great, so that people can get to their house to the train station, and from the train station to their place of work. I think that would be slightly more transformative than building a train line that doesn't actually come anywhere near us.
So what you're saying is the same as Stuart, that we've got billions of pounds being spent on a new high-speed line here, and that billions of pounds will be far better spent sort of improving connectivity to and from the station, and improving facilities on the existing network.
Yeah, I mean it's really easy actually to commute to London from Shildon, because you just go over to Darlington, then you can go straight down. So that's not the problem. The problem's elsewhere.
Very much indeed. The problem is the expense. Paul, sort of one of the things that Mr. Howell said was that if we improve the rail system, we'll reduce car use. Surely you can't disagree with him on that.
Not if the prices stay the same. The prices are absolutely ridiculous. So, like, we could become all of a sudden efficient at building things like China are, and we could, like, somehow build HS2 in a couple of years, but, like, most people are saying it's not even going to be built in most of the MPs' lifetimes, so it's going to take a really, really, really long time, and maybe if they open up Leamside or something like that, it might alleviate a little bit of pressure. But the prices are absolutely ridiculous because of the system we've got. We're spending, like, 7 or 8 times what other countries with a real public service railway are doing and are spending. So, that is not going to help ordinary people use more rail. It's not going to mean that they can't use more cars. To be honest, if you want a short-term solution, you're probably going to have to look at buses and getting a really, really good connected bus route. And Kat's mentioned she thinks that it should be free at the point of use. Actually, economically, that does make sense. It does help people quite a lot if you had, like, free public transport. But, as long as there are big rail franchises willing to make a lot of money out of the situation, and we have this, like, capitalist system of socialism for the multinationals and capitalism for everyone else, then it's going to become unaffordable for the vast majority of people.
Thank you. I'm going to switch now to the next question. I'm going to sort of, if you had any pearls of wisdom on HS2, Laura, I'm going to pass them because I do want to address this. Did you read that article in the Guardian by Rebecca Solnit, which deals with our first question? Is the Texas abortion law the beginning of the end for liberal democracy? I mean, never read anything as terrifying in my life.
Really?
And I'll put the link on Political Unmuted. It's a brilliant article. Is the Texas abortion, tell us about the Texas abortion law and answer the question, is it the beginning of the end for liberal democracy?
Okay, so the Texas abortion law, to give it its proper name, it's called the Senate Bill 8, and it's a law that's being passed in the state of Texas, signed into law by a Republican governor whose name was Greg Abbott. Brings about an almost total ban on abortions in Texas. It states that it'll be illegal to abort any fetus that can have an embryonic cardiac activity. And because of that, people have been calling it the heartbeat bill. And I think that has been a clear tactic to emotionalize it. Even though cardiac activity can be detected at around 6 weeks, the heart isn't fully formed yet. So you can see what they're doing. Surely everyone can see what's happening with this. It's one of the most extreme reproductive laws that's been passed. There's been about 11 or 12 other states that have tried to pass laws like this, and all of them have been voted down quite easily. The difference with this one is that this law is incentivizing the general public to become vigilantes on this and sue anyone who is aiding and abetting the abortions. So by doing that, it sort of protects the government officials from any wrongdoing or any legal challenge, because it's not them who's enforcing it. It'll be a civil lawsuit. The arguments are the same. Pearls of wisdom, linked with pro-life. There are a lot of people linking abortion with promiscuity. I'd suggest that people who are pro-life maybe want to take into consideration the lives of the women who are being put in danger by carrying a pregnancy to term, medical danger, the lives of rape survivors who have to carry their attacker's child to full term, and then or another thing that comes with that is that the attacker could sue her and the abortion clinic if she did get one, and also if she does carry it to term, that attacker then has rights over her child, or consider the lives of the children who will become mothers because they're not allowed to have this. Also, the bill won't stop abortions happening. It just makes them really difficult to get and makes them really, really dangerous and really less safe, because people will do, the old tricks that they used to do in the Victorian times when women weren't allowed to have body autonomy back then as well. I think women will need to travel at least 248 miles to get to another state where they will be allowed to have an abortion. The whole thing is wholly discriminatory. It's sexist. Even the UN have said this is a sexist bill. It really undermines any woman's movement. And as such, in answer to the question, it really just massively sets us back. It's disgusting. It's horrible. And I don't know if it's the beginning of the end for liberal democracy. I feel like the beginning started a while back. I feel like it is a big signpost to us getting closer to the end of it if we don't stop this ridiculous nonsense.
I mean, I think that was the key to the Solnit article, that this is sort of the sharp end of a whole suite of activity designed to destroy democracy, because so many people actually want these rights, that the only way that the right can stop them getting these rights is by destroying democracy. And she links it to the March on the Senate that Trump inspired and all the other things. Sam, I mean, in Texas, Roe versus Wade, actually, the Supreme Court asserted, even in Texas, the right of a woman to have an abortion. And that was 1973. So why hasn't the Supreme Court reasserted itself over Texas now and basically overturned this law? Why are the Texas courts being, and it's coming into effect, why are they allowed to actually enact it?
I wish I had the answer. I'm not an expert in how America runs and how they make their laws, but they obviously have this system of different states having different laws, and I'm just really shocked. Like a week ago, people were saying, wow, what's happening in Afghanistan is terrible, isn't it? It's just like The Handmaid's Tale. And now people aren't saying, but should be saying, Jesus, like America is becoming Gilead. What the actual hell is going on? We've got like religious extremists making law in America. And I know that America's always been, pretty right-wing, overall leaning, and there were certain laws you were always going to have to accept that weren't going to come into place. But like you say, Roe v. Wade was in the 70s, and we're now in 2021. And the saying is that you don't ban abortion, you only ban safe abortion. But I'd go further than that, is that you only ban safe abortion for poor people, because daughters of rich men are not going to have to suffer through holding onto a baby that is being caused through rape. It's just, they will find ways around it and it'll be all right, sweetheart. It's absolutely, I'm really glad to see people in the comments saying that their stomachs are turning. They absolutely should be. A lot of women won't even know they're pregnant at 6 weeks. Jesus, I haven't had a period in about 10 years because I keep having babies and breastfeeding and then being on weird bits of birth control. And occasionally I have a bit of a funny turn and I think, oh, am I pregnant? I have no idea. And I just think it's just so archaic. Abortion is healthcare. What we're saying is we are condemning women and the men who have to live with them and alongside them to a huge gap in their healthcare. And yes, it will disproportionately affect Black women. It will disproportionately affect poor women, and it will disproportionately affect anybody with any other mental health conditions or anything else. And it's just sick. And I can't believe it's happening in a supposed Western country.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry to cut you off on that. Stuart, I mean, people are saying on the chat, and it's a big issue sort of in the debate, that this is a law which penalises and endangers women and not the men who were involved in the initial act. I mean, sort of, what do we do about that? How do we confront this issue?
I mean, clearly it's an attack on women's rights and, you know, the power over their own bodies. But I think there's also an economic angle here, because if you want to maintain a low wage, ethnically American, I'll use that term quite loosely, state, what you need to do is have control over who's being born. And one of the ways to make sure that there's more people than jobs is to take away the right to have an abortion. You know, there's an economic thing going on here, where this is pushing that state into a low wage, low immigration state, and that's probably one of the reasons why this law has been pushed so heavily. And you know, the women are just the worst losers in this, you know, awful mess. You know, men are also losing.
The sort of, most people would say it was a religious imperative that had created you're saying that there's an economic motive.
I think there is an economic motive to it. If you want, you know, an ethnically American state with low wages and low immigration, the best way to achieve that is to have control over women's bodies.
That is just frightening, Stuart. Finally, Paul, I want to move on to the last question, if it's possible. Have you anything burning to say about about any new angle to share about the Texas abortion law before I move on?
Yeah, just really quickly. It's almost, I hate the way this is always presented, because if a woman has an abortion, it's still a traumatic event for that woman. Like, for whatever reason, that woman needs to have an abortion. What an awful position for those people to be put into, when already there is no, you know, this is not a shiny, happy topic. And I was glad that Samantha was able to make it a little bit lighter by cracking a little joke in there, because this has been quite dark, hasn't it? You know, the whole thing. But on democracy, we don't have a democracy, and the US don't have a democracy. They've got an elected aristocracy. So they elect an aristocracy, and that aristocracy can then be influenced by pressure groups. And that is what's going on. Like, they're only interested in the public every few years. But like, if you get like someone who's a massive pressure group, or someone with a lot of money, and if your state, you're funded by someone who is ultra right wing or ultra orthodox or something like that, you're going to have to go with them, because that's where the funding is. It's an elected aristocracy. It isn't a proper democracy. And we fundamentally need to change that. And I think we need to go and change that. People need to go and change that, because otherwise this is just getting worse.
Thank you, Paul. One of the points that I think is always well made is that whilst the child is in the womb, the right-wing people are so fierce in their defence of that child, of how important it is. And as soon as it's born, of course, to a mother who can't cope in a poor neighbourhood and is looking to sort of the government for support, it's just a thief and a shirker and sort of all that's awful. And there's no consistency in terms of care for the individual. The last one was actually somebody who lives in France asked me what I thought about this, and then went on and on and on about it until I put it on the poll, and it came There's a local school in County Durham that's put CCTV in the toilets. Now, I'm not talking about in the cubicles. They're not watching children go to the toilet, okay? But what they are doing is they're watching the communal areas, and they've actually taken out the boys' urinals and replaced them with cubicles. So both male and female toilets now have cubicles, but the communal area where you wash your hands and go in and come out are now being watched by CCTV. And the school is saying that this is because those areas sites of unsavory behavior and particularly of bullying. And sort of they're not being watched all the time. They're just there to look back on if there is an incident. But there's all hell on in the newspaper, with most of the comments sort of calling the school all kinds of names. Paul, your question: do you want CCTV in school toilets? Be careful how you answer, Paul.
Of course I don't, but it's really, really silly. But this is just one of those things where, what terrible, terrible PR, like writing to the parents, we're going to put cameras in the toilets. What they should have said is, we are putting cameras in the wash basin area outside the toilets. That's what they should have said. Instead, they've caused this big panic over something that people might not want the children to be filmed in that particular area, but it sounds saying in the toilets. Obviously, it conjures up a certain image. But if they have a bullying issue in those toilets, isn't it interesting that they think putting in cameras will solve that? Because there'll always be a place where children will go where they aren't on camera, and they won't do that. Do you know what the most effective way of dealing with bullying is? It's to not cause it with authoritarian systems. There is a direct correlation between authoritarianism and the way people behave and bullying. You get a lot of bullying in private schools when they're all regimented. And this is what they've found throughout the world. Wherever you've got really authoritarian regimes where there's very little freedom, prisons, very, very strict schools, you get a lot of bullying. So why not look at the real causes of bullying and maybe think, actually, maybe the whole system, and I'm not saying this school because I think there's a lot of people who think very highly of Bramall Gate School, and I'm not going to criticise that individual school. That would be very unfair. I'm talking about the whole school system in which we are incredibly authoritarian in the fact that we, teachers on an individual basis aren't like that, but the system in which they have to do this subject and they have to hit these certain times and they have to go and do exams, and what for? No one knows what for. No one knows what the exams are for. No one knows what they're useful for anymore. It's just a total mess. So maybe they should be doing something entirely different to stop bullying rather than put up some cameras and then say they're in the toilets, because that's just weird.
Thank you, Paul. We're down to a minute each, people. Laura, you're a mother. Would you send your children to a school that was CCTVing the hand basin area?
Yes, I don't. I'm with Paul on this one. I think it is bad messaging. Also, by law, they can't have somebody just sitting watching it. All it is it's just being recorded, and then if it's not needed, it is disposed of. Nobody sits and watches it or even looks at it unless there's an incident. And if there was an incident, if one of my kids got attacked, I'd want to know who it was. But yeah, like Paul said, it's bad messaging, and maybe we should be looking at the root causes of bullying. And know that it happens in schools. I know what kids are like, but I don't necessarily think having cameras in communal areas is a bad thing. If they were in the toilets, I'd definitely have a different opinion.
Sam, would you send your children to this school if you knew that the communal areas of the toilets were being CCTV'd?
Well, I may very well be not that particular school, but close to us, Bishop Barrington School are having a rebuild of their toilet area, and they're doing a very similar thing where actually the only private area in the toilets is the actual toilet cubicles, and that the hand basin area is part of the corridor, so it's totally open and public to people who are walking past. Um, this is potentially a really good thing for young people who don't necessarily want to choose the boys or the girls' toilets as they're discovering that part of their identity in their life. I do think there's a bit of a dog whistle here about girls' toilets. There's going to be cameras in the girls' toilets because men are all rapists and they're all going to get you, So I think, we have to, there is a lot of hysteria. I rolled my eyes when I read the news article because and Mia made a really good point that it's potentially damaging young people if they are then afraid of going to the toilet and then not going to go to the toilet. But I would say the people who are making that fear are the press, and they need to be a little bit more responsible about how they report school toilets.
I think it's the other way around, Sam, quite frankly. As a former teacher, I knew of large numbers of children who were making themselves ill and wetting themselves on their way home because they wouldn't go in the toilets as they were. They daredn't go in the toilets, and they tried to hold all day and sort of it led to all kinds of problems. And I think Bishop Barrington's solution sounds a great idea, and actually probably better than the Family Get More solution. Stuart, do you think that the issue is less privacy and more security of data here?
I think so. Everything needs to be evidence-based when you come up with these policies and these ideas. It'd be interesting to see what evidence the school had used before coming up with this. All I can imagine that's really going to happen is you're going to have a line of kids waiting to wash their hands while some other kids play up to the camera in hopes that one day somebody's going to watch it and see them stick two fingers up at the teachers.
Oh, what a negative view of children you have, Stuart. Probably true. I think there was one of the comments on the Northern Echo article which sort of said along the lines that we're worrying about CCTV. We need to worry much more about the fact that there are children who actually spend much of their lives in these toilets, and sort of shove loo rolls down the toilet and smear poo up the walls and then eat their sandwiches in there. And it's all part of a wider education. I think that Paul's right. It's it's a very extreme sledgehammer attempt to address a very old problem. I'm going to bring things to an end. We're 2 minutes over. My wonderful team have just talked 2 minutes too long. What a surprise. And thank you so much, Dream Team. And listeners, you'll know what happens now. We play No Pass Around. We all sort of wander off and get ourselves another cup of coffee. And then we arrive back. And the wonderful Samantha takes over the second half of the show. Remember, she's starting with a question from Mia Mantri, and I think, and we'll hear what the question is, and then Samantha will take charge of that part of the show. And I know that there are just some fantastic things that you've been saying that she will want to lost the word. Look at in a retrospective manner. Okay, thank you very much indeed. And if you're going to go now, goodbye. See you next week. Otherwise, see you in 5 minutes.
My name is Jack Atkins and I'm not afraid. And I live and die by this vow that I've made. The only good fascist, a dead one, they say, and a rhyme we are. When I first left all them months ago, I told him I'd come not to kill but to cure. For an ambulance driver, my shot's pretty sure. Panorama, here we are. There'll be no passerand, no passerand, no passerand today. The fascists have come for our freedom, and we ain't gonna give it away. There'll be no passerand here today. I told my mother, now mother, be strong, for the left way is right and the right way is wrong. And you can stick that on my grave when I'm gone, for I'm a real we are. There'll be no passerand, no passerand, no passerand today. Fascists have come for our freedom, we ain't gonna give it away. There'll be no passerand here today. Cast may be cast, and the cast may be cast, but you armies of darkness, you best do your worst. 'Cause to win, yeah, well, you gotta get past those first. And around here we are. There'll be no passerand, no passerand, no passerand today. The fascists have come for our freedom, we ain't gonna give it away. There'll be no passerand here, no passerand, no passerand, no passerand today. No passerand, no passerand, no passerand today. No passerand, no passerand, no passerand today. The fascists have come for our freedom, we ain't gonna give it away. There'll be no passerand here today. Keep the red flag flying here.
Hello, we are back for our second half and we have a guest. We've got Mia here.
Hi.
People Hello, Mia. People who have seen the show, long-term viewers will have met Mia before. She's absolutely fantastic, and she's got great insight into a lot of topics. And we're always interested to hear questions from Mia. So I hear that Mia, Mia. God, there's a whole world of wordplay going on in there, isn't there? I'm interested in hearing the question that Mia has for us tonight. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. Is telling someone not to kill themselves because of what their death will do to others really the best form of suicide prevention? And more to the point, do suicidal people not deserve more than to be told that is the main reason they should live?
That is deep. Has anybody got any particular opinions on this to want to start us off?
I don't mind going, just because
Go ahead, Paul.
no one else was. I think it's a really, really good point raised. It certainly shouldn't be the only thing people say, because that just piles more pressure on the person who's feeling terrible. Oh, you feel terrible, do you? Well, here, let's see if we can take it up a notch. Imagine, it probably comes from a place of you've got plenty, much better way of wording it would be there's plenty to live for, there's plenty of people who love you. That would be the better way of saying something similar. But yeah, I think people do go down that route, and I do think it adds more pressure onto people. And if people are in that kind of in that feeling in that way, then what they must be offered is support and care and love, rather than more pressure. It's a really, really difficult thing, and I think we need to become more caring as a society. And again, it's about saying other people have responsibility, like you have responsibilities towards other people, rather than the idea that you matter. And I don't think people who've said that will be being nasty, and a lot of people will have said those words. But I think we need to be more conscious of the damage that our words can do without even thinking about it or trying, I guess. I hope I've come across okay there, because it's really, really difficult.
Yeah. I think a lot of things are said with the best intentions, but they can be quite damaging. When we look at women, for example, there's that saying that goes around, would you like it if she was your daughter or your wife and somebody was treating her that way? And it just has the result of objectifying the person that you're supposedly trying to help, doesn't it? So I think it's a similar type of angle where it may come from a good place, but that doesn't mean it's positive or productive. I'm in the sad position that suicide affects my family quite a lot. It's unfortunately a lot of my uncles have died by suicide, and they were going through what they were going through at that time, and to make it about you as their family, it is really missing the mark, I think. It's a really hard subject. I just want to take the point to just say, if anybody is having those dark thoughts at the moment watching this program, do reach out to Samaritans. I know it's not always possible. I know that when you're in that dark place, reaching out isn't always what you can do. And to that end, if you have a friend who has gone quiet or is acting slightly differently, make sure you reach out too, because sometimes when you're in that dark place, you don't have any energy to reach out. Stuart, I'm not going to let you be quiet.
See, this is like a really tough one, because as a society, we're not really prepared for this kind of stuff, are we? We don't go to school and get mental health first aid, and you're not really given a toolkit to go on and help people through this really rough situation. The best that we're normally given is, here's a list of phone numbers to signpost somebody to. And in those situations, you don't want to promise to somebody that, you know, everything's going to be all right. You know, the world's we're going to fix this. You can't make those really broad promises, because that's completely out of your hands. And there's absolutely no right answers other than trying to give a shit. And, you know, because deep down, you know that if that person takes their own life, the world is a little bit less. And we need to start expressing this to people long before they get into this situation, you know, where they want to take their own life. We need to be expressing to people that they have value and they're important long before we ever get to the edge of a bridge or you know, looking at a packet of pills.
Yeah. John?
There was a really interesting thing on Vigil this Sunday, where I know it was just Tory, but when the chappie was threatening to take his own life, the way she intervened there was by saying, I know you can't see that now, but there are little glimmers of light for the future. And did not even begin to say how much we would miss him and sort of if you go to Samaritans, they will not try and dissuade you at all. They'll just listen to you and let you tell them your situation and talk to you about that situation. It's mainly about listening, as I understand it. I think one of the big problems here is that suicide is not just an area we don't discuss, where we're frightened as a society to talk about it. It's a big no-go area. I mean, I went to visit some friends on Sunday and spent most of the time talking about voluntary euthanasia, and sort of that, you can talk about that, you know, but sort of you don't talk about suicide, and there's so many rules. You get sort of you know you don't call it a suicide. We mustn't use that word. We're scared to talk about it for fear of saying the right thing. But the result of that is that really none of us would have a clue if we met face to face somebody who was threatening to take their own life. We wouldn't have a clue what to say, how to go about it. It's a real gap in our education as a society. If we were having a heart attack, we'd all be there singing, staying alive, staying alive. We all know what to do in terms of, or if the sort of cut an artery, we'd all be there with the belt and the tourniquet and say, twist that, keep the pressure, keep the pressure on. We all have these kind of sort of folk things that we know what to do about physical things, but it's a really very difficult, sensitive area. People are frightened of it, and there's a frightened of saying the wrong thing, and as a result, sometimes they just blurt out. And I think, Mia, when somebody says to somebody who they know is thinking of suicide, you can't go, you can't leave us. You sort of, what they're really doing is what Paul was saying. They're talking about how precious that person is to them. And they're not wanting to put guilt onto people, but it's just coming out all wrong. Think about your children. Think it's maybe education is the answer. It is just such a huge issue, and the newspapers don't help either.
Is there anything in general you'd like to add, Laura?
Yeah. So I think the people who say things like, you can't go because I'll miss you, or your family will miss you, or you can't do it to us, those people are clearly not trained mental health professionals, and so I don't think it is fair for us to say that what they're saying is wrong. It's coming out all wrong. It's coming out with empathy and care. It might not help, but if it's somebody who is so close to taking their own life, that might be the thing that stops them. That might be, that bit of guilt might be the thing that goes, oh, I better not then. At that point, anything to stop them until you can get them off the edge and talk them down and try and get proper help for those people. I think ultimately, what Paul and Stuart were saying is absolutely right. There needs to be much more robust mental health services. There needs to be no stigma around mental health so that we get less and less people to this point. We need to have a system where if you're struggling or you're overwhelmed, you can go and talk to someone, you can go and get some help, you can get some support. We should have better, just better lives in general, so that we don't have to live in a world where everything's just pressure and it's pushing us towards the edge all the time. More acceptance, more empathy. These are all societal changes that need to happen before we can start demonizing people for maybe saying the wrong thing when they're just trying to help. Obviously saying you can't go because other people will be upset is not ideal, and it's not the perfect response, and it's certainly not, I'm sure, a medical professional's view on what you should say. But I think you can't expect everybody to know all the right things to say at all the right times. All you can do is work on your knowledge of that person and your care for that person, and hope that your care comes across, and whatever it takes to stop it happening at that time.
Thanks, Laura. There are some great comments. Please read them, because I will cover some, but I won't be able to catch all of them. Neil mentions something that is actually life-saving and really important to mention, which is that you can't be afraid to ask somebody, are they considering suicide? Because that is opening up a conversation which needs to happen. If they say no, they say no. But if they say yes, you can then try and get some help in place, and you can give them space to talk. It's really important. We don't do it enough in our society. And talking about suicide prevents suicide. It's really important to know that and to action that in any forum that is available to you. It is taboo to talk about this, but it is real, and it is unfortunately destroying communities. In my community alone, we've had 3 young people take their own lives, and we are scarred. And I'm not saying that our feelings are more important, and I'm not saying that those young people should have thought about us before they did that, but it doesn't change the fact that our community is heartbroken and will be forever, because we'll always remember this 17-year-old girl and the 21-year-old boy who unfortunately ended their own life. And Laura's absolutely right. We have to look at society in this, especially for children with special educational needs and disabilities, especially for children with emotional issues caused by their early childhood. The education system is actually quite traumatic for them, that there is not help available when children and young people need help. And a lot of children and young people are left struggling without basic educational interventions, because schools can't afford the teaching assistants, schools can't afford the up-to-date training on things like autism spectrum disorders, or ADHD, or mental health in young people. My children's school has actually had to buy in mental health support for our children, because they recognise that the state of the mental health of our young people is stopping them from achieving academically. again, what year are we in? This is 2021, and it's terrible. Go on then, Paul.
Sorry, I was just as you were talking about the societal issues. If anthropologically, there's not very much evidence of hunter-gatherers committing suicide. And even in hunter-gatherer tribes that are active now, that still behave as hunter-gatherer tribes, which is very difficult to find out anything about them, because once you start making contact, they stop being the hunter-gatherer tribes. But there's very little evidence of them doing that. But there is huge evidence of very recently civilized hunter-gatherer tribes. So the Inuits, huge suicide rate. Native Americans, huge Australian Aborigines, huge suicide rate. Now this tells me that this is something that society is doing to people. And also when you said about like autistic spectrum disorder, isn't that what a judgmental term that is? Like, do you think people who are on the autistic spectrum would have been considered to be disordered in a certain, like in hunter-gatherer tribes, and would, you know, like the Native Americans had a complete understanding of different genders, and they used to have multiple genders and a third gender, didn't they, where they said it was neither man nor woman and things like that. They had much more enlightened views than our society keeps on telling people. And this really worries me. Like, what are we doing to drive this?
Yeah, and just as a point of information, so some people prefer the term autistic spectrum conditions. Autistic spectrum disorder is the textbook name for the variety of, and also in terms of terminology, people generally prefer to say died by suicide rather than committed suicide, because committed suicide throws back to when it was illegal to end your own life and lots of other things, and it also implies that it's something that you have done to yourself, when ultimately the conditions that cause somebody to end their life, you know, it's illness, it's mental illness. And but what John said earlier about voluntary euthanasia is an interesting point, and this is me as a philosopher. You know, at what point does somebody's desire to end their own life become a euthanasia? You know, is there a point where you know, my body, my choice, does that extend to ending your life? I guess it probably does. But it's a really complicated and deep conversation, which I probably should not. Completed suicide, Neil tells me, is another preferable term. And yes, lots of great comments on there.
I absolutely thank you for reminding me of what was said at the training session I went to, where we were told that absolutely correctly that committed suicide is the wrong word. Committed is just the wrong word to use, and does go back to the time when it was a crime. Have you sort of maybe you went on the same training session as I did? But what struck me very strongly about that was that everybody nodded meaningfully and said, "Oh yes, dreadful to say committed suicide. What a dreadful thing to say," and then merrily proceeded to use the term sort of throughout the rest of the session, including the trainer who told us that we shouldn't say this. And it that this is one of it's what goes back to what I was saying, that this is one of those topics where if you're not careful, the fear you have of saying the wrong thing is so huge that actually you end up not properly addressing it, running away from it, and not talking about the issues, and consequently we don't talk about it for fear of saying the wrong thing, and consequently we don't know enough about it. And I openly and freely admit that I just do not know enough about this subject to be spouting off on a discussion program, I think. And if I would want a point to be made, it's that sort of so many of us know so little about what we're talking about, that we need to know more. I just thank me for bringing this up, because of course I think we're near Suicide Awareness Week, and and so if there's a message that's coming out of this discussion, I would want to see it's that our suicide awareness of all of us to be expanded. We need more suicide awareness, and thank you, Mia, for bringing this up. It's a massively important issue.
Is there anything you'd like to say, Mia, in response to anything that's been said, or to sum anything up yourself?
Yeah, I think that a lot of it is that nobody wants to sort of look at why somebody's suicidal. And I think also they don't, I think they seem to think of it, they go along the lines of the medical model, which suggests that it's something wrong with the person. And I think often it's sort of a societal issue, and to do with the way that that society is with people. And I know with me, I was suicidal for a very long time, and what changed it was sort of my change in social circles. Because for years I used to try to speak about things that I was affected by, and a lot of people would shut me down, and that is really what affected my mental health. And my question comes from like having that said to me. And I think what I used to feel, I think a lot of people used to want me to sort of to change like things about me. And it felt like, I think it used to feel that people weren't so much interested in saving the real me as much as saving the person they thought I should become. So I think it's more about valuing people as they are, as opposed to sort of trying to change people.
Thanks, Mia. That's really powerful. Go on, John.
I think we need to be careful also about the families of those who have taken their own life.
Yeah.
Talk about, it's all about valuing people, and sort of we need to be aware of the feelings of people who have lost a close loved one who has taken their own life. It wasn't because you didn't value that loved one enough. That wasn't the reason. It wasn't your fault. If somebody close to you has died for taking their own life, that wasn't because you didn't love them enough. Sort of, there's so many issues involved, and sort of Sam's absolutely right. When somebody takes their own life, the effect upon the family, upon those who are close to them, their friends, sort of, we're told that copycat suicides don't exist, but nevertheless, you do get sort of whole groups of friends who sometimes years apart will also take their own lives. The effect upon the friends is traumatic, and Sam's right. The effect upon the community, they never get over it, and it's I think it's just a sign that what people have been saying on the comment, we need to do much more as a society about this. We need to understand it much better, and sort of and it couldn't, a bit of money needs throwing at this as well.
Another addition, I'm just throwing out a website link in the comments on Facebook. And this is Quinn's Retreat, who offer respite for families who have been affected by suicide. This is the siblings I was telling you about earlier, where their 17-year-old daughter died, and then later on their 21-year-old son ended his own life, and he was just haunted by his sister's the way that she died. Unfortunately, there were questions over whether she could have been saved if she'd received the right medical attention at the time. The family ended up taking the Northeast Ambulance Service to court over it. Actually, it wasn't court, it was part of the tribunal, I think. Anyway, the point is, you're absolutely right. Suicide destroys families, runs through communities like an electric bolt. But we must remember, like Mia said, we can't just keep pushing these things back on the person who is the victim, who is suffering, and look at what we can change about their surroundings in order to improve their position overall. So thanks really very much
I will admit that I was coming from the point of view of the person very much. But I think a lot of and I think it's not just with this, but in a lot of other areas as well, there tends to be this, like in society, there tends to be this thinking about how it's almost like it's about helping one group versus another, and actually we need to help all sort of. It shouldn't be about whether we support the sort of people, like the people who are suicidal, or the families. We need to be supporting all of them. Maybe offer different, like, individual separate support if that's what's needed. Like so that people who are in a difficult place, who are suicidal, get the support they need, but so do the families as well. It's like there should be support for everyone involved.
Yeah, fantastic. Right, not to shove that really important subject to another side, but I do want to go through some of the other really great comments we had during the show. Mark made a really good point early on. He said, how do we stop the fear of people from foreign cultures, and how is it related to how we behaved during the British Empire? What a lot of people don't get is that, as Mark carried on, we destroyed other cultures when we took them over as a colonial power. And maybe people are worried that they're gonna do the same to us, but actually the reason they're coming over here is because of the colonialism, because we forced our culture on them, so that they think we are the place to come to, perhaps, and because we've got a shared language, perhaps. Kat points out that bigotry is all about the machinery of othering, and because the same thing happens with women's bodies and women. And we were saying before about the Texas abortion law. Well, it's easy to say that it's all right about these women who can't get abortions because they're all sluts anyway, right? But actually, a lot of women have abortions. Like, it's a really normal thing to happen. We covered the whole thing about, people who say to look after our own first, won't bother to help our own. I don't see them campaigning against the universal credit cut. I don't see them volunteering at the local food bank. It's very convenient. You cover the thing about public transport should be free at point of use. We had that. There was a really good conversation about whether it is better for people to work remotely than to get the train to work. If you can scroll back and read that, it's a really, really good comment thread. Kat rightly pointing out that sustainability includes looking after our own people's mental health and their well-being too, and for some people that does include going to work. And Margaret Bondfield, if that is your real name. She's not a real she's incognito. She says, while we live in a world where men make decisions about women's bodies, we will never be equal, which is really profound. And you could have that in calligraphy on your wall, couldn't you? Does anybody want to say anything about any of those things going on there? Is it, Laura? Anybody want to add anything to that raft of comments I've just spewed out?
Good comments.
Good comments. Yeah, good comments.
As
I mean, we
always.
really deconstructed colonialism and all kinds of stuff. Hey,
This is really an important issue, and we ought to discuss it on the show one time, and I'll be really pleased to have a show. I'll put it down as a question and see if we can get it on the show next week, where you have time to think about it and then comment. There's this real historical debate about how good the British Empire was. Was it a force for good or a force for evil? It's a genuine historical debate, and there are points to be made on both sides about it. But what, of course, when this comes into the political arena, you've got this kind of thing whereby the right wing simply want to glorify Britain's past as a great nation, as some kind of actual way to browbeat the population into a form of loyalty and nationalism. And so you've got this very kind of nationalistic way of looking at it. And yet you've got this on the other side, you've got people who are absolutely concerned to vilify Britain's past and the things like the slave trade and the concentration camps, and they draw out all these aspects of Britain's past which are very, very negative, and particularly the damage that very often the people who went there thought they were doing the country good. The damage they did to those countries was absolutely monumental. And it's sort of how we view our own past is no longer just a historical debate. It's absolutely central to your politics and to how we not only see ourselves, but how we progress into the future as a nation. Absolutely vital that we consider this. And so well done. Was it Neil Terry that was bringing? Mark Lungley. Well done, Mark Lungley, for bringing this issue up. Absolutely central. Our past determines our present and how we try to move into the future.
We had a funny conversation at work. We have to. One of my teaching standards is uphold British values. And I've got to uphold British values, and we all had to take the thing. So I went to see my line manager, and I was like, I'm not sure how to do this. I said, what are British values? And he was like, I don't know. And then we started talking about what British values were, and someone was like, is it invading countries for oil? And things like that, you know? It's like, maybe that's a British value, you know? It's really, really bizarre that we have to uphold British values and none of us quite know what they are. And it's like, it's like, oh, is it anti-fascism? Because in the build-up to the war, they were pretty pro-fascist in a lot of respects, and certainly the British mainstream press were, the Daily Mail were. They all loved the fascists, didn't they? So, and now if you're anti-fascist, you're meant to be a threat, aren't you? So, interesting times, but no one seems to know what that is. So if anyone does know what British values are, then do that. It's me filled with performance management.
It's singing that One Nation song, isn't it? Is it One Nation? Can't even remember. It was such a good song. I can't remember any of it.
I've just remembered it. Thank you.
Oh gosh. Well, I'm not going to drag on. Just a thought for you all to think about between now and next Tuesday at 9 o'clock, when you will come and see us again, Amelia said, how can we, or how can women, how can we, how can all of us fight for women's rights in the way that they are being attacked in America and even in Afghanistan? I think that's a really powerful question. If there is anything we can do, we've got plenty of time for you to go back, get that done as your homework, find out how we can turn this tide, which is coming for women globally, and it'll come for you next. And if you can come back next Tuesday with an answer, we'd be really grateful.
Oh, actually, can I just quickly jump in there?
Yeah.
Just a heads up, our Socialist Night Live on Saturday night at 9 o'clock will be focused on women's rights. I've got some incredible guests. I will, once I've made the poster, I'll share it. I'm really excited. It's going to be an awesome show. So
any sneaky previews?
No. People have to wait. I'm waiting for me last guest to confirm, but I've got 2 awesome ones, and people will know who they are. So.
People who don't listen to the podcast, people who listen to the podcast might not see the poster.
Well, they'll have to listen to the Saturday podcast then, won't they?
Okay.
Oh, by the way, just before we all get to wrap ourselves up in It's Not Our Problem blanket, don't forget that years ago, it became normal for women to have to talk to benefits advisors about whether they'd been raped or not in order to qualify for benefits. That's still true. It's still happening. It's still inhumane, and it's still a jolly good woman-hating policy. So, we can fight that here by voting against the party that put it in place. Absolutely. The rape clause, absolutely barbaric. Anyway. On that note, I will let you go. Thank you very much for coming. We are on Socialist Think Tank Political Unmuted every Tuesday at 9 o'clock, and we are also on Facebook. I'm going to say Instagram, not Instagram. We're on Facebook.
We are on Instagram.
We are on Instagram.
Go live on Instagram, but we are on Instagram.
Good Lord, we are on Instagram. Twitter, Twitch. Yes, Twitch, and on wherever you get your podcasts. If you search for Socialist Think Tank, you will find all of the podcasts, and it's definitely enough for you to listen to while you're knitting or driving or whatever you do when you listen to podcasts. So please,
sorry to interrupt you. Do we have a guest panel member next Tuesday? Is that confirmed, Paul?
Yeah, Neil's coming on. Neil Tory.
Yay, Neil!
This is a dreadful question to ask. It's his first time, isn't it?
Yeah,
on the show.
Sure. Yeah.
So exciting, Neil. So you've got a whole week now to get nervous about it. And watch out for these four. They're really cruel to new people on the. But the host is absolutely lovely to you, so you don't need to know.
We're really looking forward to it, Neil. And if anybody else ever wants to come on, despite what John says, ignore John. We are lovely people, and we will help you through it. And it's really important for people on the left to exercise this and practice speaking in public, and this is a lovely warm way to start and work out how to make those thoughts that go around in your head come out in a coherent sentence that comes out of your mouth. It doesn't happen by magic. It does take practice, and we need to upskill ourselves for the fights that are coming to us in the future. So please do come on the show and let Paul know, or anybody else, if you think you might fancy it. I'm going to need some random days off here and there now that I'm, the most senior politician on the panel. I've got work to do. Anyway, so we are going, you are going, sleep, have a nice sleep, wake up ready to fight the capitalist system tomorrow, and I will see you next week. Okay then, bye.